G'day Vanfam, Sveto here. This week I'm going to be sharing with you guys what's going on out there in the world of caravan weights and balance. The data that I've collated and tabulated has simply never existed before, or if it has, no one's ever shared it publicly. Trust me guys, this video is going to be an eye-opener. In case you're new here guys, my name's Brett. I've been travelling Australia for the last 4 years and I run a mobile weighing service as I travel around Australia. I'm parked up just outside Darwin at the moment with the guys from TT Weigh. I'm up here for the dry season, which is when it gets busy up here. This has been such a great experience for me as I'm doing far more weighs than I normally would while I'm traveling full time, and I'm learning from one of the best in the business. But on top of that, I've got access to the results of hundreds and hundreds of weighing sessions. So when I haven't been out there physically weighing, I've been back in here and I've been mining data. Guys, this has been a mammoth undertaking. It's taken me weeks, but the data that I've gathered, it's priceless. So between work and this project, I hope you can see why I've been MIA for a couple of weeks. Here's a quick snippet of what I've built. I've tabulated the results of over 600 weighing sessions, and I've noted if a setup was overweight on each of the 8 key compliance criteria. I've also recorded the van's ATMs and payloads, and if the setup was over, I recorded by how much. Okay, a quick couple of caveats before we get started. What I've been recording is the results of setups as they arrive in with us for an appointment. That means it's before we've made any modifications. In some cases, not all, but in some cases, we are able to make some changes to setups and bring them into compliance. So what I just want to point out is I've been giving the results of setups as they come in. So if they came in uncompliant and left compliant, they've been recorded as uncompliant. I think this gives us a better idea of what's going on out there on the road before setups have been weighed and balanced. Secondly, I want to point out that we're looking at the results from conscientious people that actually go in and have their weights and balance looked at. There's some data out there from RACQ that suggests that only 4% of the population knows the weights and balance of their caravans. Personally, I think that estimate is probably a bit low. There's a heck of a lot of mobile weighers out there these days, and I reckon the portion of public that know their weights is probably a little bit higher. But the fact remains is that there is a large percentage of the people out there that don't know what their caravan's weights and balance is. And the results that we're looking at today comes from the portion of public that actually cares and goes in to have a look at their weights and balance. So just keep that in mind when we're considering this data. Okay guys, caveats aside, let's take a look at my data. As you can see, when I looked at vans, 58% of the vans that I looked at when they came in were over compliant somewhere. When I looked at vehicles, 63% of the vehicles that come in are over compliant somewhere. And when I looked at setups as a whole, almost 3/4 of the setups that we look at as they come in were over compliant somewhere on one of their 8 key compliance criteria. That's pretty much in line with RACQ's estimate of 70% of people on the road being overweight. Guys, that is a staggering amount of people being overweight and therefore unroadworthy. It's pretty clear that we've got a serious issue here in Australia when it comes to safety and compliance in caravanning. To give us some insight as to what's going wrong with vehicles, I've generated this graph. This graph breaks down the vehicles into their compliance criteria, and as you can see, the most commonplace vehicles that are going overweight is their rear axle at 47%, followed by their GVM at 40%. Next, I broke down caravans. As you can see guys, the most common issue for caravans is that they're going over their ATM or aggregate trailer mass, with 47% of the vans that we looked at being overweight. But for me guys, the most concerning number on this graph is the number of caravans that are poorly balanced, as measured by total mass percentage. As you can see, 29% or more than 1/4 of the vans that we looked at had a poor total mass percentage, meaning that they were either too light or too heavy on their total mass. Being outside of the ideal total mass range can lead to caravan sway, and the fact that more than 1/4 of the caravans that I looked at came in that way, yeah, it's kind of concerning. Now, total mass can actually be quite easily manipulated, and any decent mobile weighing service out there is going to give you advice as to what your total mass percentage is and advice on how to sort it out and make it safe. So when you consider that RACQ thinks that less than 4% of people are actually going in and having a look at their weights and balance, yeah, it's concerning to think that more than 1/4 of the vans out there are poorly balanced. But guys, looking at this data as a whole like this, it doesn't really give us any actionable information. It doesn't really tell us what different van ATMs and payloads do. It doesn't really tell us how different vehicles perform. And that's why I dove a lot deeper into this data. But before I start sharing that with you guys, I'm going to make a coffee and I'm going to take a seat at my couch, office, dining room table. Yeah, I'm going to take a seat for the rest of it. All right, guys, let's start with caravans. To try and get my head around what's going on with caravans, I broke them down into payload capacity and I created these two graphs. This top graph shows the cumulative compliance rate failure, and this bottom graph shows an exclusive range compliance rate failure. I think both graphs are pretty clear. The more payload that you have, the more likely you are to be compliant. I want to point out that only 20% of caravans that have less than 500 kilos of payload are compliant, and I can tell you from my experience that those caravans that were compliant with less than 500 kilos, they would have either been owned by a single person or they would not have been set up for full-time travel and they would have been used for weekend use. This is going to be a hard pill to swallow, but in my opinion, if you're a couple and you want to travel Australia full-time and you want to carry water in your water tanks, the bare minimum payload that you need is 650 kilos. And even at 650 kilos, you need to be conscious of what you're taking and you need to be sticking to the essentials. You won't have much room for the nice to haves. For families, it's going to get even harder. The bare minimum payload that you'll need as a family is 750 kilos if you want to carry water in your water tanks. You know, kids carry extra clothes, bikes, schooling gears, and that stuff all adds up, which is why you need more payload as a family. But guys, here's the kicker. Of the vans that I analyzed in this data set, 59% had less than 650 kilos of payload. Or to phrase that differently, more than half of the vans that I looked at didn't meet the minimum requirement that I would consider workable for a couple, let alone a family. I think this reveals one of the biggest and least talked about issues in the caravan industry today, and that is that there is a serious lack of payload capacity. Let's start digging deeper into vehicles, and to do that I've generated this graph where I separated the vehicles into the different classes. So the different classes that I identified were the big wagons, so these were your Land Cruisers and your Patrols. Then you've got your soft roaders, these are vehicles like MUXs and Everests. Then you've got utes, so things like Rangers and D-Maxes and Hiluxes. I separated the American trucks into the 1500 trucks and the 2500 trucks. We honestly didn't weigh too many trucks over the years. We've only seen 5 of them. Of those 5, they were all compliant. Conversely, when we looked at vehicles carrying boats, we've only seen 16 of those and 100% of them failed compliance. Well, technically there was a Y62 Patrol that passed. The only thing that it failed on was its brake towing capacity, so it was towing more than 3.5 ton. But yeah, that's the overall series. As you can see, the big wagons and the American utes, they seem to be the worst performers. Let's start digging a little bit deeper and we'll start with the worst of them all, the American trucks. All right guys, American trucks. 79% of the 1500 American trucks that I looked at were over compliance rate. I'll point out that our sample size was relatively small at 29, but it's still enough to draw some pretty damning conclusions. Aren't the American trucks touted as the bee's knees when it comes to towing and the future of towing in Australia? Well, the truth is the 1500 variants have terrible rear axle numbers. Their rear axle limits are smaller than most of the modern Australian utes, and when I break down where the trucks are failing on, you can see that 66% of them are failing on their rear axle, and this is higher than the average of 44% for rear axle failure. Out of the 29 1500 American trucks that I looked at, only 3 of them passed without a GVM upgrade, and I can tell you that those trucks had literally nothing in their tray. Here's the harsh reality. The 1500 American trucks, they need a GVM upgrade if you want to tow 3.5 ton or more, and if you want to put anything at all into your tray. And the truth is, even with a GVM upgrade, you're still quite limited as to what you can get in the back of the tray. I'll quickly touch on the 2500 plus American trucks. They definitely have significantly better axle numbers and carrying capacity. However, as you can see, still 73% of them are over their compliance limits. I think the reason for that is a little bit different though. What I see is most of these 2500 trucks get fitted with a huge canopy, and that canopy is loaded to the hilt, and they tend to be carrying the biggest caravans out there. And it's for that reason that these trucks are still going over their compliance limits. You have to keep in mind, guys, that these 2500 plus trucks, they do still have some limitations. By far the most popular vehicle in the data that I looked at was the Land Cruiser. And of the 159 Land Cruisers that I looked at, 100 of them were 200 series. And I find that interesting because, as I'm about to demonstrate, the Land Cruiser 200 series, it's certainly got some problems and some limitations. I'll bring this graph up here that shows the compliance rate failure of Land Cruisers when you break them down by models. As you can see, we didn't do a lot of 100 series and they had a failure rate at 86%, and the next highest failure rate was your Land Cruiser 200 series at 80%. That is 80% of the Land Cruisers out there that we looked at were failing on compliance. The best vehicle out of the Land Cruisers, it would seem, is the 300 series. It looks like Toyota have upped their game when they moved up to the 300 and they made them have a fair bit more payload. But let's dive a little bit deeper into the 200 series because they were by far the most popular vehicle and they did not have the best results. So what I did with the 200 series was I broke them down into if they were standard and without a GVM, if they had a GVM upgrade, and there were a few chopped 200 series that came in. Interestingly, every one of those chopped 200 series that we looked at were over compliance, and frankly, they were over compliance by a significant amount. On average, they were failing their rear axle numbers by 500 kilos. I think that's got a lot to do with the canopies that go on the back of them, and I'm going to talk about canopies a little bit later in the video. But for now, let's just look at the wagons. So without a GVM upgrade, 87% were failing, and with a GVM upgrade, 68% were failing. If we break it down into where these vehicles are failing on, 67% are failing on their rear axle and 48% are failing on their gross vehicle mass. The issue with the 200 series Land Cruiser is they just don't have a lot of payload. A lot of their payload is eaten up by all the big accessories and things that you have in there. Generally, they have around 650 kilos of payload, depending on your model. Obviously, the Saharas have significantly less. And once you put 2 passengers in and a caravan on the back, you're pretty much consuming all of the payload of the 200 series Land Cruiser. Now, the problem is most people buy their 200 series and deck them out to tour around Australia, and the back of the wagons, they've got fridges, drawers, batteries, tools, they've got the works. And that's why 87% of the Land Cruiser 200 series that aren't upgraded are failing, and even with upgrades, 68% of the Land Cruiser 200 series are failing. Yeah, so as you can see, guys, the Land Cruiser 200 series, the most popular towing vehicle out there, it's got some serious limitations. Let's go on now and look at another of the popular wagons out there in the Y62. So I looked at 39 different Y62 results. 84% of the Y62s failed when they didn't have a GVM upgrade, and we only looked at 7 GVM upgraded Y62 patrols and they all passed. One of those Y62s was actually carrying a boat, as I talked about earlier, and it only failed on its brake to towing capacity, which isn't really the vehicle's fault, so I gave it a pass for the purpose of this graph here. So the Y62 is a pretty capable towing vehicle when you upgrade it, but it's still got its limitations, particularly when you don't upgrade it. And same finding that I have for the Y62 as the Land Cruiser 200 series is all these ones that are failing is because they're all decked out to travel and tour full time. They've all got trays and batteries and things going on in the back, and that's why they are all being over compliance limits. Before we move on and look at the other vehicle classes, I had a suspicion that your patrols and your Land Cruisers were generally towing a lot more weight. So I looked at the average ATM of the caravans being pulled by Land Cruisers and wagons, and as I expected, on average, they were pulling a 3.3 ton caravan in comparison to utes that are only pulling 2.85 and soft roaders that are only carrying 2.6 ton. I suspect the weight of the caravans that the Land Cruisers and the wagons are being asked to pull is the biggest reason why they have the highest compliance failure rate. We'll move on now and we'll take a look at the soft roaders. So in the soft-roader class of vehicle, we're talking about things like your Everests, your MUXs, your Pajeros, there's Toyota Parados. They're by far the most common, but I did see quite a large variety of different soft-roaders out there pulling caravans. And it had a fairly reasonable pass rate. Around 50%, I think overall what we get to, 56% of your soft-roaders were being compliant in the vehicles. Now, that is most likely because people are being far more conservative when it comes to their caravan choice if they're being pulled by one of these vehicles. As I pointed out, on average, they're pulling about a 2.6 ton caravan. The other reason why I think the soft-roaders had a much higher success rate is people tend to be far more forgiving as to how much stuff they put in the back of them. It's not very often that you see a soft-roader loaded with drawers, fridges and batteries, and that is the reason why more of these vehicles were being compliant. Next, we'll move on to the utes. I'm quite a fan of the utes. I couldn't imagine traveling without a ute. Overall, utes had the best compliance rate. Again, a huge factor in this is the fact that the utes are towing lighter caravans. So what I did was I pulled my data and I isolated to the utes that towed 3.5 ton vans. I only found 17 utes towing a 3.5 ton van, and of those 82% were over compliant. So obviously carrying a really heavy caravan is a huge factor in why vehicles are going overweight. It confirmed my hypothesis that the wagons were failing because they're pulling bigger vans on average as well. So if we break down the utes into the different types of utes out there, they're all performing fairly similarly. I can tell you that the Ford Rangers, the Tritons, the BT50s and the D-Maxes, at least the current versions of those that are out there, they've got the best GCM, GVM and axle numbers, and I think that's reflected in the data. As you can see, the Rangers, the D-Maxes, the BT50s and the Tritons, they've got a pretty good compliance failure rate. All right guys, what I'm about to tell you now, it doesn't come from the data. It's not something that I was able to quantify in a graph. This comes from my experience out there looking at different setups and weighing them and working with my clients and seeing what works and what doesn't work. The reality is, if you are not GVM upgraded, you just can't put a lot of gear into the back of your car. You can maybe get away with some tables and chairs if you've got a vehicle with really good compliance numbers like a Ford Ranger or a 300 series Land Cruiser. You can maybe get away with a small fridge and a battery. But the second you start going down the path of big fridges, slides, big battery systems, filling those drawers with gear, tools, you're going to need a GVM upgrade. And the reality is, even with a GVM upgrade, you need to be considerate about how much gear you put in the back of these vehicles, because as my data has shown you, even with GVM upgrades, a lot of these setups are going overweight. As I hinted on when I talked about the Chop 200s and their canopies, I want to take the time to talk about canopies, because if you want to put a canopy on your Tourer, there is an absolute guarantee that you're going to need to do a GVM upgrade, because nobody puts a canopy on the back of their vehicle and doesn't fill it with gear. As I say, have canopy, must fill it. Now the type of canopy that you put on, it actually matters. So those jack-off canopies that have got all that extra framework for you to pull in and lift those canopies off, they are significantly heavier than an average canopy. Also, the big fancy canopies that you see on four-wheel drive 24/7 that are built with railing and they're able to withstand rollovers and things like that, they are significantly heavier than some of the other canopy options out there. Lastly, you really need to be mindful about the extras that you go for when you get a canopy build. So if you get one of those big trundle tray drawers, those things can weigh up to and over 100 kilos, and that weight is overslung behind your rear axle. Then you've got those side boxes, they're also behind the rear axle, and you've got a box there, so you've got to put things in it. What I find is with setups like this, before you even put on a fridge and a battery and some gear into the canopy, if you're running boxes and slides out the back, you're getting pretty close to your vehicle's capacity before you even fill the canopy. Guys, I'm not saying this because I want to take the fun out of life. It's just that I do this day in, day out, and I see it all the time, and I hate having to tell people that they have to get rid of the stuff that they've spent thousands of dollars on and hours setting up and installing. It's a horrible thing to have to do, and as the data has shown you, even those big 2,500 plus trucks, they can't get stacked to the brim. You have to be a little bit more considerate in what you put in your setups. What I'm going to do now is take you for a walk outside, and I'm going to go over some of the decisions that I made when I built my D-Max, and give you some advice as to how you can still have some nice things but stay compliant. So we'll go out and we'll have a look at how I built my D-Max. All right, guys, there is my D-Max. We'll start up the front. I don't have a bull bar, I don't have a winch. All I have is a light bar and a nudge bar. And come around to the canopy design. It is a lightweight canopy. As you see, we've got no boxes, no trundle tray. So all this space out the back behind my rear axle, that is all vacant. The tray that the canopy sits on is an aluminium tray. It's custom and it's as lightweight as I could possibly make it. I didn't opt to get a floor on my tray. It's just got the rails because I knew that I was going to be sitting a canopy on top. This canopy is not a fancy canopy. It's just made in bulk back in Southeast Queensland. The thing that I like about it is that it's lightweight. Now, unfortunately, it's not super strong. It's not fancy. It's not the best canopy out there, but it is nice and lightweight and it's doing the job. We'll have a look inside now. So I call this side my fun side. We have a fridge. We position the fridge as far forward as we can. We've got a battery system up here, and all in here, in behind this area here is where all the cables and everything are. So I tried to get as much of my heavy weight forward as possible. I don't have a drawer system on this side. All I've got is some tubs to hold the gear and the barbecue out the end. We come around to the other side now. I call this side the work side. I do have a drawer system around on this side, which is probably quite heavy. I just love the peace and quiet out here. But yeah, guys, so I have the drawer system and I carry my weighing equipment in here. I'm probably eating into around 200 to 250 kilos of my payload in order to carry this business around with me. Despite that, I'll also point out that I do keep the scales as far forward as possible. I'm trying to get them forward rather than having them out behind the rear axle. But despite having about 200 to 250 kilos of business built into my setup, I'm still compliant on my rear axle by about 100 kilos, and I'm compliant on my GVM by about 300 kilos. So if you build a lightweight canopy like this and you're conscious of how you fit it out and where you place things, it is possible to still have some fun things. As I said, I've got about 100 kilos to spare on my rear axle, and I've probably got about 200 to 250 kilos worth of business in the back of this thing. So if you didn't have the business, if you built your canopy like this, you've still got about 300 kilos for fun things, which means you could potentially get a boat in a setup like this if you stay conservative on your canopy. All right, we'll close up the canopy and we might wrap up this video. Guys, I'm not trying to come to you and be up on my high horse. The reality is I've actually been where 74% of setups are out there. I've been overweight. I was watching the influencers at the time and they made me think that I could have a canopy full of crap and a boat on the roof and everything else. The reality is these days, the C in caravanning, it probably should stand for compromise. You just can't have everything. Even if you can afford one of those big 2,500 plus trucks and a 4.5 ton van with over 1,000 kilos of payload, some of those setups are still going over as well. You have to start being a little bit more conservative as to what you put into your setups if you want to have a setup that's compliant and safe out there on the road. So with that, guys, I'm going to wrap up this video here. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you got something out of it, and we'll see you on the next video. Bye. Thanks for watching, Vanfam, and we hope you enjoyed the video. If you'd like to support the content we create, we've made it super easy. Just scan the QR code on the screen and it'll take you straight to the donation page on our website. That way, your donations will make it directly to us and cut out any middleman. No pressure at all, guys. We're honestly just so grateful that you're here and watching, but every donation does make a big difference, helping us to keep the adventures going and the content coming. Thanks again, guys, and we'll see you in the next one.